Sawadeeนะคะ. Thank you everyone for coming today. It's a pleasure to have you here in our gallery for an artist and curator talk for New Makers exhibition. This exhibition is proposed to us by a Singaporean art curator, Siuli Tan, and she will be introducing this exhibition to you as well as the artist and the presentation a little bit after. But let me just give you a little bit overview of what the gallery is all about. ATTA Gallery has been running for 12th year now. This year we're going to our 13th year. And we have originally started with only contemporary jewelry art, but now we have expanded our focus to cover material-based art, visual arts of all different materials and techniques. And this exhibition really embodies what we're trying to do, to create dialogues between different types of artworks, different materials, different techniques, different backgrounds of the artists, and also a dialogue between the viewers and the artworks and the artists. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Siuli. Hi, Siuli.
Hi, ATTA.
At the bottom, let me just, hold on 1 second. Speaker view. There you go. So yeah, go ahead and please introduce yourself and the exhibition.
Thanks for the introduction, and hello from Singapore. I'm Siuli. I'm the curator of this exhibition called New Makers at ATTA Gallery. So I want to say something about the title of the show and what I was trying to explore in the show before introducing each of the artists who will speak about their work and practice. Regarding the title, New Makers, I want to touch on the word maker because I think it's a word that doesn't occur very often in contemporary art or the contemporary art sphere where I work. To be a maker implies the involvement of the artist or the creator's hand in the making of the artwork. The hand of the creator is very much present. And when we think about making, chances are we think about very traditional craft like ceramics, woodworking, and sculpture. And I think also invested in this idea of making, besides the presence of the creator's hand, is a very laborious, time-consuming process. But the time invested in the making of an object is almost like a labor of love and a skill that you develop over time. Now, this is really interesting to me because when I came of age in contemporary art world, this approach to art or creating objects had been pretty much thrown out the window. And I was coming of age as a curator in a time that could broadly be described as the conceptual turn, where basically in art, the idea or the concept was the most important thing after all. And it didn't matter who made the final artwork. It could have been farmed out to a studio of assistants or, the materiality of the object did not matter at all. The idea was the most important. But what is also interesting to me is how art works in cycles. And actually in the past few years, what ignited or what started this exhibition was my observation that in Singapore, a younger generation of artists were returning to exactly this approach that I have described. It was a very slow making where the materiality of the artwork and the object came first and foremost beforehand. And these very young artists were very invested in developing skills, very traditional skills, I would say, and approaches in making their artworks, which was completely counter to what I experienced as a curator working with more conceptual artists that time. And this shift has been echoed globally as well. We've seen a lot of institutional and museum shows dedicated to craft and craft objects in recent years, and also very huge international well-established galleries like Hauser and Wirth have dedicated entire departments or even galleries to promoting craft. So it's definitely something that's coming back into our consciousness. And I wanted to put these ideas out there with this show, which brings together 3 young artists from Singapore and 2 artists from Thailand who are makers, right? But what's interesting to me, and that's why I titled the show New Makers, is that they occupy a very fluid position working in between contemporary art and craft. How do we define contemporary art? How do we define craft? What are the materials and approaches conventionally associated with each? I think each of the artists I'm going to introduce today addresses this in a different way in their own practice. And I think that is what makes their approach and also this exhibition very rewarding for me to think about how the younger generation is rethinking that position between art and craft. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the first artist and our first speaker for today's session. And her name is Ong Si-Hui, or Si-Hui for short. Now, a little bit about Si-Hui's works. Her works are the marble pieces that you see in the gallery around you. And Si-Hui is a sculptor. She works with stone, very hard stone like marble, granite, and she retrieves these often as offcuts from construction sites in Singapore. And how she creates the sculptures is through very slow and meticulous hand carving. And she creates these shapes which oscillate between very organic shapes, but also very geometric, minimalist shapes. And what was interesting to me is how she questions that traditional monumentality associated with marble, because her pieces feel very intimate and they are very much often inspired by household objects and implements. So with that, Si-Hui, if you're joining us now, take it away.
Hi, hello. Hi. Okay, yeah. So can you hear me fine? Yeah, let me share my slide. Yeah. Okay. Hi. So my name is Si-Hui and I mainly work with stones. I think of stone carving as a kind of process art. So like the long and slow sculpting process kind of contextualize and conceptualize the pieces. And like even if like usually at the end of it, like most of the marks of the hand are removed and what's left is a smooth, clean, polished state. So I'm starting with this series of work that I think kind of marks the beginning of my explorations in geometric abstraction. So this work is titled Moth That Flies by Day, kind of inspired by the short story Death of the Moth by Virginia Woolf. So the series started with a simple basic diamond shape that kind of gets gradually like dissected and reassembled again and again. Yeah. So for me, this series was, I mean, the idea of the story kind of is rooted in like death and anxiety, and also through the form that kind of embodies like the different states in which the moth flies or rests or dies. So from then the idea kind of snowballed from there, and it wasn't an intentional decision at any point, but then I just like the ideas keep coming. I keep on sketching and making, so it just become this really extensive like experimentations on just geometric and abstraction. I do find that it's a language of expression that I'm very comfortable with, like kind of ironic, because in a way it's inside this construct that you can only express through geometric. And but in some ways I do genuinely find that the possibilities are endless, and there's also a freedom to just really express, like even if like some of the topics that maybe I couldn't quite put into my words to describe or what. Yeah, so so with a medium like marble, like historically how you think about it is kind of like precious or grand or what. So that's always a conscious decision for me to kind of work against that notion. Yeah, so for a very long time, most of the sculptures I made are always displayed on the floor, like mainly because of the like first and foremost, I don't want them to be on a pedestal, uh, or not even like behind any barriers or what. So the just physically as well, I do find it just kinds of makes it more accessible just by sitting on the floor. Yeah, so I'll talk briefly about my process and how I make them. Yeah, so I will touch about there are few different ways how works came to be. So for this work here, it's purely mathematically driven. Like the idea first and foremost just comes from wondering like if you have seen a 3D a globe, like when like so usually you'll realize like they print onto the surface like using like leaf shaped strips, like just identical pieces forms together, like engulfing the globe all around. So the idea came simply to kind of wanting to flatten and dissect the spherical shape. So this piece of work is, if you just piece the four pieces together, is exactly 1/32 of a spherical net. That's like a globe if you flatten it. Yeah. So the next one here, like similarly, it's kind of it came from a place when it's not really like grounded to any deep emotional feelings, but I mean that's compounded along the way. But this came from my fascination with the number 8. So so there's some photo showing my process. So usually I start by sketching. So in sketching, it's kind of like fine tuning certain ratio or the look or how I think it's be physical, like physically if it's like possible, or would it be too difficult for it to make it in stone. And then I will make small styrofoam prototypes just to visualize and understand the process better. So afterwards, it's about just following the exact steps as I made them in like miniature prototypes, but transferring them and sketching them onto like slabs of stone that I first cut them into the exact precise rectangular shapes I need, and then just along the way, so trimming down the stones and drawing and cutting and drawing cutting until it eventually is kind of like you wear down a square into octagon, into a 16-sided, 32-sided. So eventually it's a kind of a completely smooth and rounded by the end. Yeah, so in my process, I have amassed a lot of these styrofoam prototypes. They are very small, like not more than 5 cm in diameter for each mostly. So like it came out of a necessity for me to visualize how to approach carving them in stone, because the process is so hard, like, and there's really not much room for error. So I'll just try to fine tune and like kind of get the muscle memory beforehand. Yeah, so and as time goes on, it also became a alternative way for me to just sketch ideas. So if I think about a spear that's like elongated or compressed, like I can sketch them, or like I can just like directly kind of, it's also sketching but like 3-dimensionally, like straight away. So I have like quite a collection of all these little objects I was looking at them for a while. So I was preparing to start a new series of works. And as I stared at these pieces, I was just wondering, like, how could you hold all of these like spherical objects that don't quite sit right, that they move around, that they kind of breaks easily. So like some of the two pairing ideas kind of came from the surroundings, the workshops and hardware. And some of them came from like some of a more domestic place. So there's this work that I always quite like, because I at the time I look at all around me, like I like kind of can only see like the tools and mechanism behind everything. So so for this piece, I was noticing that like every time when I drink like a bubble tea or what, the pearls will always get stuck. So it kind of made me wonder, like, so if I made this large like 4 kg marble stone, could it be just suspended by pure friction inside this acrylic tube? Yes, yeah. So this is one of the works that's in the gallery. So yeah, so for this one, I've noticed that like in supermarkets they sell garlics and onions always in these bags of like very fine mesh net. So it's just very intriguing, interesting to me, like how like it holds them so barely, like so delicately. Yeah, so this work here, it's also interesting and kind of different from the others in the sense, because it's kind of supported by itself, like the both the marble pieces kind of need each other to be supported, and also kind of counting on this small little like rubber suction that's between them. So I made two new works for the show. That's one of them. So it's about, I would say there's about maybe 1 year plus of pause in between this kind of ongoing series. So while I did continue making like various small prototypes, I just haven't actively had them or just think about how to best present them. So the for this work, because of how small the marble stone is, it kind of like took me a while just to find like the right clamp that's kind of hefty enough, just like as a like contrasting weight to it. Yeah, so the piece here is supported by like a regular clothing clip or peg here. Yeah, so like for this series, like for like previously in the beginning, like I kind of touched about the work, the moth that flies by day, and there's a few some of the works I have that kind of like references like novels and texts in some way or the other, but for this series I kind of reverted to like pure mathematical names, kind of like that. There's some that I mean more common, like teardrops and spears. There's some that kind of gets more technical, like oblate and prolate, like spear rods and stuff. So in a way, I feel that like because of the pairings of these items and how some of them like can be found like around like commonly at home or outside. So there's this one that I kind of prefer it to kind of have begin from a kind of antiseptic kind of place, like just without any other other add-ons just on the title aspect. Yeah. So yeah, so my have another piece at the gallery here. So it's kind of a small tooth and like visually very different from the rest. So it's kind of I a bit lost count, but if it's not the second, then it's among the first like 5 or what of the marble sculptures that I ever made. So it came at a time when I returned back to school for my BA, and it just really come from wanting to make something after a while, and at the time it was also kind of funny. So I was also working as a dental technician, so it just came about in a like kind of amusing way. But yeah, so it's different. It's kind of like, I mean, it's like sketchings and like modeling kind of was kind of part of the process also, but it wasn't really just like quite to the extent as I do now. Yeah, so that's all.
Thank you, Sihui.
Yeah, thank you.
Etty, would you like to do a quick summary in Thai for the audience, or shall we move on? Let me know what's good.
I think we're good. We can go on.
Okay, great. So I'll introduce the next artist from Singapore, and her name is Shane Hua. Now, Shane is a ceramicist, and she's often struggled as well with her role as an artist or a craftsperson. Normally, when we think about art, then we would think about an object that exists for its own sake. But when we think about craft, we often associate that with functional objects. And Shane's objects blur those lines because she creates vessels that are in the tradition of ceramic vessels that you might find in museums or, pots and bowls, but she makes them dysfunctional or malfunctional, and she emphasizes their aesthetic qualities instead. And we've got a series from her in the gallery right out front, which is one of the earliest works she made, exploring precisely that intersection or that discussion and tension between craft and art. But she's also got a more recent series also in the gallery where she repurposes antique or vintage pastry molds that she's been collecting. And she presses her clay into these pastry molds to capture an impression of the design. These are the molds that, traditionally have been used to make cakes, and they're very much associated with domestic art. Shane uses ceramic pieces made from these molds and forms them into parts of a ceramic vessel. For instance, their arms, their feet, or their legs. And what she's doing in this collage is a very interesting discussion between, the work of an artist and the work of an artisan. So with that, I will hand over the time to Shane now to walk you through the rest of her work.
Hi,
Hi, Shane.
let me share screen. Okay. So these are my works. I screenshot from my own website and put it up here. So I will go on to the next one. So my works goes in quite a few different directions. Like a lot of time when people ask me what do I really do, I find it quite hard to express like the content especially. So there are times where I work on works that talks about cultural traditions and like sometimes stories from mythical stories, and then sometimes objects that would often be seen in cultural tradition. So like all these pictures and then mountains, and these are about Mid-Autumn Festival, which is on mooncake, if you guys have seen it before or ate it before. So this is the story behind that, and I made it into a wall pieces. So sometimes I do installations, sometimes I do wall work, sometimes I make into sculptures, and other times, other than this is one of the direction that I go into, I then also, okay, so these are the molds that Siuli talks about just now. So the one on the right is the wooden molds, and then I will make it into plaster mold so that I can continue to preserve this wooden molds. And then it's also for it to be thin enough for me to put in the clay and take it out. So usually all this mold, just like the mooncake you have seen outside, is quite thick. So I want to make it thinner so that I can make use of the texture on the top. That's why I made into a plaster mold. And then these are more collection. And I actually have about 3 or 4 boxes now of like this molds. Then next, which is, so just now it was all about cultural tradition or like stories that got me interested or amused by, and then I will use the medium to express that. And then sometimes I also go into political, social political themes, and then talk about sometimes post-colonialism and also like post-Cold War period, and usually about Singapore, because we rarely, I guess, or nowadays you can see more stuff about the political works, but not so much in the past because we are still quite afraid of showing that. And then so other than political cultural tradition, and then now I'm moving on to these works which are more focused on functional, about functional bodies and how each different parts of the functional body attracts me. And I also, yeah, you can see here the pastry molds also exist in these works. So sometimes my ideas also combined. So I will combine them, and then like so those 3 different directions don't just always go 3 separate ways. Sometimes they combine, and I'm inspired by my previous work, and then I move on, and sometimes I go back to another work again. So all of these works are not like different phase of my practice, but more like whatever that interests me at that moment, then I will do it. But especially, I guess, for this show, I'm quite excited to be able to show more of these functional ones, because a lot of times I think galleries would be interested in stuff that has like a conceptual point, like what Siuli is talking about, and like maybe when it's talking about political, then they will be like, wow. And then when it's something functional, maybe it's more towards craft. But I guess for Singapore, I think they are more like surprised that it existed in contemporary setting as well. So these are the functional ones. So you can see that this Candy Kundika and malfunctioning series is in the gallery. One of the series of this malfunctioning series. So if you look at like all the other works, you can see that there are a lot of differences in my past work and my newer works. If you go to my website and you scroll all the way down, you'll see that it's more minimal in the past, and then I get like more and more into the decorative stuff, partly maybe because of also the stuff that I've collected, and it got me to play with these forms, and I slowly move away from the more minimal ones. But also I'm still, after I just recently showed the works that is in the gallery, the one that is like fully white and which is called malfunctioning series, that I think it got me to want to make more of those works again, so that I have no like definite style, which I hope I can continue it that way. Then so these are works made around 2016, and then these are more recent, about 2023 or like maybe before, around there. So, and then I also do some functional water feature as well. So I included like fountain in my works. So that's like more of the recent one, which also talks a bit about function, but at the same time it's not really a functional stuff, but it's functioning as like a fountain. So then if you see, like especially this is the ones that are showing the gallery right now. Some bottles that I made use of the pastry molds that you have seen just now. And then this is 2016, the stuff that that I've been doing. So I'm quite obsessed with white clay and making like flat surface and like or just simply black clay. And now it's more moving towards this type. And then these are some of the zoom in of the 3 works. And this is also another work, and there's 2 sides. That's why I call it a doppelganger taffy, because of how the colors look. It's very sweet. And then, so back to this malfunctioning series. This is one of the series, and I'm quite obsessed with going to museums and look at artifacts. I think mainly also because of the medium I work with, because I can make functional wear. So then I just have to stop and like look at all the different works, and you can't really touch the museum artifacts, so you have to imagine how it can work. And that is also, I guess, the reason why I start to pick up functional parts of this item in museum or everyday life, and then I will just join them, whatever that I see. So all of this you see here won't really work that well, but like it's just my obsession of how it can work in certain way and how I imagine it to work. That's why I put them together. Like this one over here, it can be a ladle or it can be a smoking pipe because it's the same shape, or like this one with another handle, like a handle from a cup, and also how the spittoon in the past is all joined together. And nowadays you have seen, like you can see like those plastic one which is separatable, and like it works like a function with a cup. So these are some of the stuff that I think about as a maker of ceramic, and how making this vessel, being able to use this material to make all this vessel, got me to make this work. So these are the whole entire series. So I joined, like I mentioned, funnels. So I collect a lot of I also went to look for strainers. I went to look for straws, and I joined them and imagine them as a spout, because it also functions as the same way. The spout transport the water through the body of the teapot, and same way you would use the straw to suck your water out of a drink. It transport water. So I just think of all these different functions and join them together. So the front here, you can see that I dissect a particular structure that I really like, to kind of see how is it like within the body of the vessels, and like how I guess is to express how I look at objects as well. Because then here you see I focus on the handle, and certain part I'm just focusing on the outline of the vessel. I'm just dissecting, and also when you put them together, it's just quite fun to look at it and how it progresses. So that's malfunctioning. And then one of the series that's here, you can see later, it's the one on the right over here. And then Candi Kundika. Candi is a Malay term for kundika. And I found this kundika, kundika is a Sanskrit word. So, and then kundika, I found all this vessel from Korea National History Museum. So I went to look for like its meaning. So it's usually for Buddhism and their ritual. And then it can trace back to Hinduism. So that's also how it's also very popular in Southeast Asia, because in the past we are mostly a Hindu region. So then I combine like 2 different types of Candi and kundika that are very similar. So I just combine them, some of the different parts. Like probably Candi wouldn't have like this long spout. Like kundika would have this top. And then I add on my usual pastry things that I just feel like, okay, I would want like a handle that way. Because this part here is a handle, but I just wanted to just add my usual handle like stuff, so that you can imagine your hand being holding this area. And then I just add on another at the bottom, as if to support the spout and the connection between the spout and the body. So then I feel like it looked quite as a whole together without like gaps. That's how I kind of join two pieces together. Then I think that's the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Shane. So
you.
this brings me now to the third artist in the exhibition. Carmen, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. It's Carmen Cheniga Prado. Now, Carmen was born in Spain, but she's living in Singapore right now. And I got to discover her works, obviously, when she was in Singapore. Carmen works primarily with wood. She hand carves blocks of wood. Again, like Su Hui, she gets a lot of her raw material from sites which discard blocks of wood that they no longer need. And for Carmen, she connects very deeply and intuitively with wood as a natural form, a form from nature. And she's extremely sensitive to the qualities of wood as well, its grain, its texture, and its mass. And she's often spoken about how carving the wood allows its inner essence to reveal itself. So what she seeks to do through her work is to create sculptures out of wood. They are extremely elusive in nature, they're evocative, and they suggest the qualities of our embodied existence, both in spiritual as well as physical terms. So you will see a lot of correlation between the wooden sculptures and parts of the body, such as the navel or the belly, for instance. And what I find interesting about Carmen's practice is that she extends this idea into a related medium, which is that of painting. So accompanying all her wooden sculptures are companion pieces of ink on paper or canvas, where the forms are very vortex-like. Carmen is an artist. She was born in Spain, but she's now residing in Singapore. And she is primarily a sculptor who works with wood. So very much like Su Hui, she gets a lot of her raw material from sites where there are offcuts of wood available, discarded, and then she shapes these into forms that very often have a very deep connective relationship with the human body. So when you look around the gallery, you may find sculptures that, for instance, echo the human spine or even the human navel and belly. And I think what's really interesting to me about Carmen's work is that the wood sculptures are so evocative, right? So she works with the nature of her raw material, its grain, its texture, its mass, and she carves away at it to reveal that essence, an essence that in one sense corresponds to the human body. What also interests me about Carmen's practice is that she also translates these ideas into companion works on paper or canvas. So these are normally ink works, and they have very vortex-like forms, which echo, once again, the kind of energy fields or the internal hollows of the human body. I'll hand over the time now to Carmen to walk you through her works.
Okay, thank you, Siuli, for the introduction. Let me share my screen. One second. Okay. Let me just get started. So I use the language of abstraction as a tool to reflect on the internal body, kind of how Siuli introduced, in order to gain deeper insight of the subtle shifts that happen inside of us. So I feel like our internal body is kind of this vast, mysterious place with with all the layers of our skin, of our muscles, but also of our thoughts, of our sensations, of our emotions. They're all kind of like interwebbed together. And I feel like all of these layers, they give us sensations throughout, like gentle messages throughout the day. You get a pull in the stomach or a knot in the chest. So I'm very interested in kind of unpacking these very abstract sensations that we feel in order to give them form, to perhaps access them or help us observe them from different entry points. So as you can see here, in the past, I worked with, I used to make these paintings that they're acrylic and ink on canvas that kind of focused on these expansion moments that we all have, that we have internally, and of the movement emanating out perhaps of our breath, or when you feel like an emotion is shifting or transferring from one to the other. And then these handmade frames that I would make out of blocks of wood would kind of expand the shape of the canvas further, so that the movement of the pulsations are expanded. So I'm very interested in how, painting and wood have this correlating relationship within each other, and sort of make both materials come alive, by having this sort of emanating force. So this emanating force is something that is kind of a thread throughout my practice. I've then my practice has then led in two directions that complement each other. But on the one hand, I've got the painting practice, which again is about trying to develop this language to explore these internal body sensations. So these paintings are quite big, and they're kind of the body size. So you stand in front of it, it mirrors perhaps, how the spine, like Siuli mentioned, has different sections, or how you feel sometimes that your spine feels very upright, or your spine feels like it's a bit stuck. So for example, the blue painting on the right called Moment of Release is about, all the tension in the spine just gets dissipated from your feet. So I'm very interested in how all of these abstract bodily sensations can be then explored visually through painting, but also how the act of painting is actually very related to the act of carving for me, which I will touch on shortly. This is another example of the paintings that explore these internal knots, or the knots moving, or the layers of muscle kind of vibrating in their own way. Here you have an idea of kind of the scale of the paintings, what I meant by body size. So you can see, for example, the painting on the left is, darker, because I feel like the internal body tends to be romanticized a lot. It's kind of spoken in this beautiful manner, but the truth is that it can be a very uncomfortable place to be as well. So I'm interested in how all the full spectrum of that bodily experience is very important to me, the darkness and the light, and how they complement each other. So here you have a couple of my wooden sculptures. These two pieces are both at the gallery. Seed, which is the one on the left, is on the left wall, and then a root, which is the long one with the spine, is on the wall behind. Here you can see how my painting language and carving language is very, very interconnected. And in fact, what really attracted me about the material of wood, which Siuli also mentioned, is this, that it feels like you're working with a piece of material that has already its history. It has the history of the tree. It has all the internal knots, where sometimes you try to carve through it, and it's so hard because of the knot that you can't get past it. And I feel like all of these little nuances of how the wood has its own history really resonated with me, because that's kind of exactly how our body works. We all have our story. So trying to respect that and work around all these little aspects of the material made it a very interesting process for me, because it seems like you start working with this other body that is speaking back to you. So these two sculptures, as you can see on the gallery, they are hung at body level, so that when you stand in front of them, they reflect the body. So on the one on the left, you've got this central spine, and then at the bottom you've got this dark opening of walnut, which has this revolving activity, kind of like the activity of the belly, and then it leads up this little thin part, and then it opens up at the chest to perhaps invite the viewer to mimic the shape of the sculpture, So also, I only use carving knives. I don't really like using machines because you lose a lot of the sensitivity, and you can see it has this kind of trickling effect, because I'm interested in making the sculptures seem like they are moving, or like they have a sort of their own vitality, Here you can see a little bit of the process, the carving knives and slowly carving by hand. Of course, this is it's a very laborious process. So like Sihui, carving stone, it takes hours and hours and hours. So it kind of guides you through all sorts of emotions, from the meditative nature, but also moments where you just want to. The material just doesn't do what you're wanting, and your body is exhausted, your shoulders hurt, So it has this very realistic process that it doesn't have to be over romanticized, and also it doesn't have to be put down. These processes have been used for hundreds of years, and they are very special because they hold on to a lot of qualities. So this is something that always really, the fact that we can be so involved in the process of making something in a world where this is not really valued anymore, I think this is important. So, yeah. Kind of going back to the painting, these two works are on the left-hand side wall. They are called Drift 1 and 2. And I think that these two paintings, you can kind of particularly see what I said before about the painting language and the carving language being very intertwined. In a way, carving has really inspired me to think of painting as a volume. So it's not just simply a flat surface, but rather you're kind of carving out the image by all these layers. So the way that I use my brushes, it's actually very similar to the way I use my carving knives. And for me, this has been very important, because then this kind of relationship with the material that you're working with becomes very important, where you are listening to the surface, you're responding with the touch and with the feel of the hands constantly. So actually, I feel like without carving, I wouldn't have been able to paint in this way, where I use a lot of thin layers in order to build up the volume and really focus on this internal body feel. So for example, the painting on the left, it has a much more kind of like visceral tone to it, where you have more knots. You're kind of going down your throat and going deep into the belly, whereas the one on the right, it has a more high lifting feel. This is why we hung them, one a bit lower, one a bit higher, in order for them to have this different speeds. Yeah. Here you see them at the gallery, and then in the center, we placed this circular sculpture that has this center point that it seems like it's either emanating out or coming within itself. And we felt that this round sculpture, even being such a simple shape, it holds on to a lot of kind of connotations of things that the beginning point or the ending point, it all kind of comes full circle, and it acts as this sort of belly button of the room, where it just grounds everything at the center. And I don't know, I'm very interested in these simple shapes, because I feel like they have a very bodily feel, but they also have such connotations of nature and how things are like sprouting always, or ending or dying, and it's all part of the process. this ink works called Renewal number 1 and 2, both also touch upon this, vortex-like movement that both relate to the body, but also to the things, everything that surround us, how we feel wind on our skin, or how we feel, liquid moving through our body. So it's all about keeping this vitality and this movement alive so that we don't get stuck on one particular thing. So my work is all about this, about celebrating the constant shifting and the movement of things. Here on this little corner, we've got this little series of 3 ink drawings and then a small cluster of sculptures at the bottom that are also, the small drawings are called biofluid 1, 2, and 3, because I'm very fascinated about bodily fluids, our blood, our saliva, our eyes. It's like this machine that is constantly flowing different directions. And for me, this just relates back again to wood and the internal grain, how it sort of relates to our veins. It looks exactly the same actually when you start carving into the wood. So I'm really fascinating about these bodily connotations. Yeah, and this is all.
Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you.
So with that, I would like to introduce the next artist and the next speaker for this afternoon. And Fa, apologies in advance if I don't pronounce your name correctly. Fa Wutigrai Siripon is a lecturer, designer, and a weaver. And he is deeply invested in exploring and preserving the relevance of traditional material knowledge and skills, especially in contemporary culture today, where machines have overtaken a lot of the work that was traditionally done by hand. Fa has actually done a lot of research on this matter, together with researchers from the United Kingdom, for instance, exploring one of the case studies he did was exploring how traditional weaving and communities of weavers are surviving today and how they are renegotiating their traditional skills to make it relevant for today. And what Fa has created for this show is a series of works, weaving primarily, that aims to blend 2 aspects of heritage, of Thai heritage, that are fast fading from modern consciousness. That is temple murals and woven textiles. I think when you think about a lot of contemporary visual culture today, you don't think of these 2 forms, but Fa recognizes their beauty and the skill that has carried on throughout the ages in these 2 forms of art. So he's tried to combine these 2 forms because with painting, you get very flowing line work, but with weaving, it's rather more structured because of the grid-like structure that you work with to create textiles. He has combined these 2 with a very contemporary approach to making by drawing again on another older form of craft, which is manuscript wrapping, as well as materials that have largely been forgotten in contemporary making today, which is the use of jewel beetle wings. So I'll leave it to Fa now to tell you more about his work in general, as well as the series that he's presenting at ATTA Gallery.
Right. So thank you so much for having me. So my works in the gallery, you can see on the walls, 3 of them here. So I just want to give you kind of brief introduction to the development of the works that I present for this show. So my work in this series started from this piece that I kind of try to figure out what weaving can do and try to find a language for weaving that is beyond what we find normally in Thailand. That is like when you do weaving, it's normally for garments and for home furnishings that I kind of find limited in some ways because it's kind of done for so many years. So for this piece, I took the image from a pair of doors from a temple in Peshawari province, is of the late Ayutthaya period. It is like the previous kingdom, like 200 plus years ago. So the method is that I wrap the yarns, the colors of yarn to match the location of the forms, and then when we weave that, the form appears. So that's the temple. I didn't have the image of the doors because it was in the restoration phase by then. But you can see the kind of, the atmosphere of the place where the inspiration comes from. So I work normally in weaving. I'm a weaver, and I do research, academic research, and I do teaching relating to weaving and textiles. And this is more like my another dream to do weaving and to find something different and something that I can do for for the future. So the murals that I took the inspirations from and forms are kind of this period of murals. They don't have many colors. They have white, red, black, a little bit of yellow. And what I love about this is that this temple has a kind of very free form, very freestyle in terms of painting. You can see the lines that is not quite rigid, that is very common for Thai traditional paintings nowadays. And what I love is the textures and colors that kind of fade, and you can see and you can't see. I think it speaks a lot about the sense of time, a sense of craftsmanship, and it's a form and the narrative that speaks to me. So that's one part of the kind of visual inspiration. Another side of where the works come from is more technical and more like rooted in the culture. We have a very strong weaving culture in Thailand, and a smaller portion of that are devoted to Buddhism, where it's believed that women weave something or make something textiles to offer to the temples or the monks, because they can't be ordained, they can't be a monk. So they have to find a way to make merit for themselves so they can go to heaven, kind of thing. So there are items that women weave. For example, on the right and the upside down hanging is kind of hanging banners that if you go to temples in like Chiang Mai or in Northeast, you see them hanging around to signify that there are events here, is something happening. And it's handwoven on the loom. It's very simple in terms of techniques. On the left is manuscript wrapping. It's basically bamboo strips that is wounded by colored yarns and create the patterns. And you use the manuscript to protect palm leaf manuscript that they would inscribe the chanting or teachings on that. And palm leaf is like actual palm leaf, so it's very fragile. So, so the Buddhists would offer something to protect that. It can be imported textile, it can be like gold, embroidery, textiles, anything, but this is another type. And what I find interesting in these two is that they have bamboos in it that is not actually like textile material, it's kind of rigid. And in terms of visuals, it's very graphic, it's very bold, and it's kind of more graphic than what you can find normally in textile. It's more like detailed. So another source of sort of more like inspiration, aspiration for me is this work from by Peter Collingwood, British weaver. It's very contrast to the other sources that I presented before. What I find intriguing about his work is that it speaks a lot about the integrity of weaving, what weaving can do in the simplest form, and be real to weaving. It doesn't have to pretend to be something else. It kind of shows that weaving is just about yarns arranging into opposite ways, but he can make it very contemporary. Even now you can still see his works in auction and in galleries, although he passed away for quite a few years now. And to me, the work that I try to do is that I'm trying to find a language that is not pretending to be something else, but not limited to what weaving can originally do. So go a little bit further, but still sort of like true to weaving. You know, it's a kind of geeky weaving endeavor. Right. I have lots of inspirations. This is where the beetle wings come from. This is a Japanese company, Tamiya Raden, and what they do is that they take mother of pearl and they shade it very, very thin, and they put it on a washi paper according to design, and then they cut the paper into very, very small strips, and then they weave it to make obi, sashes or kimono. When the material is very interesting, and what I find it very interesting when you put something hard like mother of pearl that has no flexibility at all, but it's very shiny, and put it into weaving and make it work as a piece of textiles. And then you think, well, maybe we can do that, but I don't want to copy him. I think maybe we have something local that I can make it iridescent. So I find beetle wings that is very brittle and very gleaming, very iridescent. So the beetle wing comes because I want to find a material that I find interesting to work with and kind of bring something new. So the works kind of in the series sort of developed from the sort of pictorial, guardians in the first slide. This is the first one that I put just the beetle wings in to find a way to make it work for weaving. At first I framed it because I thought it kind of might look nice, but later I don't quite like the idea of framing because it makes it look like painting. That is not what I want to do. I want to make it like weaving as textiles. And this is not the next piece that I kind of try to combine the idea of introducing visuals, more like forms, imagery, with the materials, with the beetle wings. And I find that the colors and the narrative and the kind of the aesthetics kind of can work together. So I was invited to show in IOTA, the Indian Ocean Craft Triennial in Perth. And the curator asked me to design a piece that fits the wall. So she has a space. So we discussed, and I came up with this like 3 meter long piece that I combined the forms of the murals and the idea of the cracks of the texture, the fades, and add the beetle wings in. And actually the green color of the beetle wing kind of is very similar to the mirror decoration that you can find in Thai temples, that they will have like green mirrors and golden sort of like base relief sculptures. So it kind of works together. And the idea that because beetle wings, they don't live very long as beetles. The life cycle of beetle wings are like a year or two, but they live and develop underground. So they come up as full beetle, flying beetle, to mate and to eat. Then they die after 3 weeks, and then you collect that. And we do have farms in Thailand that they do this. And the royal projects, the Queen Mother's project, she encouraged people to preserve this because it was kind of forgotten, but it's normally used for embroidery. So for this kind of technique, it's basically bamboo wrapped with yarns, colored yarns, and I weave it on loom, just a normal loom, manual loom like that. So I would put the thread, the bamboo strips one by one. So it has to be sort of planned before, like what strip would contain what colors where. So that's another piece that I made that kind of try to be focusing more about colors, not so much about forms, and make it, it's about atmospheric color rather than, having the angels. So this one was recently acquired by Hood Museum in the US, so I'm very pleased. So for this show, so this is the last slide. So this show, I developed a new piece, 3 new pieces. So these are the sketches, and you can see the, it always works like this. So the sketches would be, taken, and it's more like collage of murals. So I take different pieces from different spaces and put them together and combine it with the green beetle wings to find a kind of composition. But when you weave and with the technique, it's always abstracted because of the way it's done. And I have assistants working on this. So what you do is that you match the yarn. It's basically sewing threads. So you have to mix the yarns to match that particular color. And it's always up to your eyes how to match that. And, different person would match that differently. And I think it's very interesting when you do that. And it's not direct. It kind of go through people's hands and, work on that. And it becomes something that sometimes is kind of unexpected. Like the first one on the left, you can see kind of forms there. But when it's kind of bounded on with threads, it can become like almost, nothing. It's just colors. So that's the process. And I guess next I want to make some more. And next year maybe I move on to something else. But it's not finished yet. But I try to find the language, but it's almost there, but not quite there yet. So hopefully, thank you.
Share. Okay. Okay, so now back to Siuli.
Yep, Fa, thank you very much. And it gives me great pleasure now to introduce the last artist and speaker. Again, Nucharin, I apologize in advance if I can't pronounce your surname right. Nucharin Wangpong Sawat. Now, Nucharin is a woodworker, and she came to woodworking almost by chance because she started off with industrial design. And then she enrolled on a woodworking course, and she basically fell in love because the practice of woodworking gave her a certain calmness, concentration, and that intimate connection when you work with your hand to make something. So in her work, what I find really interesting is that Nucharin, similar to Si Hui, she seeks to overturn assumptions about what wood sculptures can be. I think in Thailand and a lot of Southeast Asia, when you think about wood objects, you think about functional or utilitarian objects that are quite heavy. For instance, furniture or even quite bulky wooden sculptures. But Nucharin's works are always very light. There is a lightness to them. There is also a lyrical quality with very flowing lines. And what she's trying to do in her work, as she will explain, is to really explore and expand the vocabulary of woodworking in her practice, as well as the forms that can be achieved through the woodworking techniques. So without further ado, Nucharin, I'll hand over the time to you now.
Hi everyone, and thank you, Siuli, for the lovely introduction. I'm gonna talk a little bit about some of my old work that became the main drive for the body of work of this exhibition. So in 2016, I received the opportunity to be artist in residence at Museum of Art in Wood in Philadelphia. That's the first time I start explore with curve bending technique. And this is some of the old work from the exhibition. So to explain my work a little bit, the way I work, normally I'm not gonna plan for the end object that what I want it to be. So normally I will let the process inspire me during the making process. I will limit myself with the tool and the machine I work to be maybe just like 1 or 2 technique and 1 or 2 machine, just to give myself like more challenge. And then like from there, I'm gonna try to maximize the way I work with this technique and try to create as much as to create the form as much as possible to see the opportunity at the end, what can it become. So after I came back from the residency, I having hard time to went back and try to pick up where I left off from this exploration. So no matter how much I try to work on it, I feel like somehow my skill getting worse. And the more I try, the worse it becomes. So my confidence start to getting smaller and smaller. So I have to set the curve bending practice aside for like a while, and then working on another project, and then try to come back again to see what did I do wrong during the process. And to explain a little bit about what curve bending is, it's very technical term for woodworking. I don't know how to explain it in other language, but for curve bending and curve cutting, so like the space in between, that's the one we call curve. It's happened from the thickness of the blade. It can be done on bandsaw, table saw, or even a hand saw. So normally this technique have been using in woodworking for many years, maybe like 100 years or something. You can see it in musical instrument. If you have like piano, violin, or guitar, if you take them apart, you're gonna see this kind of structure inside the instrument. It's used for construction and also furniture making. But I don't see people use it as much in terms of like making an art object or like some other form than just like reinforcement or a structure. So that's why I'm interested in try to pick up on this technique and try to find another alternative to work with it. So the main machine I use for this exploration is table saw. And the thing is, when we're talking about table saw, people will thinking about table saw as like this big, robust, very masculine machine that's super dangerous. It can only make like 3-meter work, but actually if you know how to work with table saw, it can create such a fragile and delicate work. And I want to challenge people perception, not just only like the way we work with wood, but the way you use the tool and the machine to create the work. Because I want people to understand it more than, because mostly people will perceive woodworking as a very robust, masculine work, but actually if you know how to do it right, everyone can do woodworking. So when I approached this, when I came back and revisit this, the curve bending practice again, I came back and tried to look at what I did wrong and what the main problem that I didn't achieve. So the work itself, in terms of the look, I'm pretty satisfied with how fragile it looks, but the problem is it's not strong enough to be like a complete work. And with curve cutting, it's very, very tricky because the leftover thickness have to be thin enough so you can bend it. So when something that are really thin, normally it's not going to be that strong. So if I drop it, it's going to fall apart immediately. So I cannot go any way further than just making a circle or a half circle for like this exploration. Then I come up with a solution because I try to think, okay, if I want something to be strong but still flexible, what kind of bending technique I can add more on my work? Then I come up with the steam bending. So steam bending is one type of wood bending that you use moisture and heat, and you kind of like when you steam the food. So you put the wood into the steamer, so the heat will make the wood fiber start to expand. When the wood fiber start to expand, you can start to manipulate the form. So this is some of the exploration I did. So this is how I steam bend the work, like for this exhibition. So actually you can build your own steamer, but I happen to have this, this little electric steaming laying around in my studio that I bought for my previous project. So somehow it's come with this steaming tray, and since my study piece is not that big, I don't want to spend like 3 days to build a steamer box. I decided to like touch a bunch of the curved piece, and then I soak them in water and then throw it into the steamer just to see how it's gonna turn out. So I start with something simple like a circle or a half circle. Then I make a bunch of them and I clamp them. You need to suspend the form and then let it dry for like overnight. So I came back another morning and then see how it turned out. And it turned out to be something that I have been looking for to develop my work. So after that, I just like kept making a bunch more and then try to fine tune the thickness of the wood, the size, and try to like train myself to get used to this, like this motion in my work. Because with this cow bending, you need to be firm, you need to be quick, but in the same time, you need to be gentle with the work. You cannot just like cranking like the clamp because it's gonna break. And you need to be fast because you're working with the wood that when you take it out from the steamer, when it's contact with the cold air, they're gonna start to like getting solid again. So it's kind of like training my muscle to have this muscle memory, like take it out from the steamer and then like bend it. And I have been doing that for maybe like 1 week until I feel that, okay, I'm confident with my working process. Then I move on to make the form more complicated. This is the video. So this is the short video to let everyone see how flexible it is after it's come out from the steamer. So this is what you pretty much can do with the steam bending. If you do this without steaming, they're gonna let you do it at some point, but they're gonna start to break. So after that, I just keep making more and more pieces. Start making, like instead of just like circle, start to make the form to be more three-dimensional. So I start to twist them. Yeah. Make it a little bit more challenge. So after twisting, I start to do something a little bit more complicated, like tying like simple knot to see whether it's work, and more complicated knot. So this is like how I work, start from simple and then getting more crazier and crazier until I cannot take it anymore. Then I come back to simple. And when I'm talking about like suspending the work, so this is what it looked like. You need clamp to like clamp on, but sometimes people will make like this big jig to hold the work also. Yeah, and after that, when I get like this, like various of form, I start to lay them on my workbench. And this part is gonna be kind of like you playing like a puzzle game. So there's like a bunch of multiple pieces laying around. I'm gonna start like putting them together and then see how it's turn out. Yeah, once I get like some rough idea, then I just keep playing around more and more and more. So this process actually is a mix of improvisation and a mix of intuition altogether. And this is the final work that showing on the stand over there from this exploration. So this serial work is more like the development I always yearning to make after I came back from residency, but I never succeed until I came back and revisit it again last year with like a better approach. So I start to make like kind of like a next generation of that work, and I still want to develop and keep making more, because now I start to feel like I'm moving into a right direction. There's still like a lot of things I need to work on, but at least I feel like I make some redemption for myself after being failing for many years. Yeah, so gonna work on more and then see how far can I go. That's the plan. Thank you. Okay. So Siuli, sorry. Okay.
Thank you, Nucharin. And Ati, I'll hand the time over to you in the gallery. Do we have some time for questions and answers now from the audience?
I think we have 5 minutes to do that.
Yeah.
If anyone has any question for any one of the artists, please feel free. Everyone was very clear, apparently.
Maybe I can ask the curator. I think this is a question that I've been asking.
มาข้างหน้าได้ไหม
In my own practice also.
ลองมาข้างหน้า
Hello.
Okay.
I guess I would ask the curator and also the artist as well. Maybe if you could somehow articulate the relevancy of craft practice in contemporary art discourse. How would you say is the benefit of engaging in art making in these terms?
Maybe I'll respond to that from a curator's perspective, and I come from an art historical perspective. So I would say that craft has always been there. It's really nothing new. It's just that at some point during the Renaissance in Europe, there occurred this separation between fine art and craft, simply because of patronage, which created the demand for individual geniuses like Michelangelo or Titian. You know, previously it would just be atelier of so-and-so. But because of patronage and the fact that you needed to attach the prestige to an individual maker, that's when the idea of the artist became separated from that of a community of makers instead. So the individual was privileged. That was in terms of European art history. in terms of, I think, our region, Southeast Asia, again, I feel that there's really a very fine line dividing art and craft. If you look at places like Korea or China, a lot of objects that the Western world would consider craft have been revered as high art forms in their own cultures. So I feel that this adoption of the Western canon or the Western perspective of separating art and craft was really only introduced when we started to take on Western art history that came with colonialism. So, previously there was actually no word in the Malay language for painting, right? So that was a really recent phenomenon. In terms of what value this approach to making brings, I think that, listening to all the 5 makers we've had today has amply, at least for me, articulated the joy and the importance of knowing and sensing and working with your material. In terms of what I think this approach brings to art history is that it really expands the canon and discourse for alternative ways of creating objects of contemporary culture that speak to a broader range of what people are concerned with today, apart from the usual, I would say, narrower range of forms that we would associate with contemporary art. Bringing craft into the picture also makes space for the work of creators who have traditionally been excluded from the canon, the work of, say, women, right? The work of artisans or people who work in a more collaborative or communal approach, such as a team of weavers. Why are their works not considered important enough to be shown in museums or to be considered manifestations of culture, representative of the cultures that they live and work within? So I feel that expanding this lexicon or expanding this discourse of the art world to include approaches and practices more traditionally affiliated with craft also expands our understanding of what these forms of making can say about the time that we live in and the interests and values of people making them. That's from my perspective as a curator.
Can I say something from like a maker point of view? I also think has about, at least for me, I mean, I don't know the rest, about challenging the notion of what intellect means. I think particularly from the West, the idea of intellect has always, it's like from the Enlightenment ideas, it's like the brain is all, the mind is all. And there's been this notion that you can only be smart if your brain works in a certain way, and that we can only gain intellect through certain practices. But I feel like devoting yourself to a material also teaches you different ways of learning and different kind of accesses to intellect that perhaps aren't just mental, but they're also more sensorial, perhaps, like the touch, feeling a surface, the idea of volume, and also the idea of time, challenging how precious our time is nowadays, where things need to be made fast. When you say, no, I reject your idea of time and I will build my own idea of time through this material. So I think that for me, that's something that has always been important, that the mind has always been prioritized overall, and to really bring to the forefront other ideas of intellect. I think that's a really important thing to do, on regardless of which material you're working with.
Any other comments from the artists? One last question. All right, if there's no other questions, I would like to thank all the artists, all the makers, 3 from Singapore and 2 from Thailand here, and also for Siuli Tan for giving us the opportunity to host this exhibition. And the exhibition will be on until mid-May, so please come by and take a closer look and bring your friends over. This is very special exhibition. And yeah, we need to expand the notion that, arts could cover more than just what we are used to, painting is two-dimensional. It could include different types of materials and techniques. So please bring your friends along to see this exhibition. And this presentation will be posted on YouTube after being edited, so people can rewatch it or watch it at their own leisure. Thank you so much, everyone. ขอบคุณมากนะคะปากับน้องนนท์แล้วก็ Thank you everyone for coming today. And please, stick around and take closer looks at the work we have on site. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.